The wooden auction block cracked under Maverick's grip as he watched the auctioneer drag a woman forward by her chains. His blood turned to ice. Those amber eyes, that defiant tilt of her chin, the way she held her shoulders despite the shackles he'd seen this face 1,000 times in dreams that had haunted him across 3 states. "What am I bid for this fine specimen?" The auctioneer's voice cut through the humid Tennessee air like a rusty blade. "Strong back, good teeth, perfect for housework, or ... other duties." The woman solace, his mind whispered, though he'd never heard her name spoken aloud, lifted her gaze and found his across the crowd. Recognition flashed between them like lightning splitting an oak tree. She stumbled backward, chains rattling, her lips forming a single word, "You." Maverick's hand moved to his saddlebags where his life savings rested in a worn leather pouch. 3 years of working cattle drives, sleeping under stars, saving every copper penny for land of his own. Gone in an instant, if it meant freeing the estate. A woman who'd visited his dreams since he was old enough to understand what longing meant. $500, he called out, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd faced down stampedes and survived. The crowd turned to stare. Whispers rippled through the gathering like wind through wheat. A drifter in worn boots and a patched coat didn't typically bid on premium merchandise. $550, countered Cornelius Grimm, the wealthy plantation owner whose reputation for cruelty preceded him like a shadow, his pale eyes fixed on solace with hunger that made Maverick's stomach churn. $800. Maverick stepped forward, pushing through the crowd until he stood at the base of the platform. Up close, he could see the purple bruise on Solace's temple, the way she favored her left foot. Someone had hurt her. The rage that built in his chest threatened to consume him entirely. Grimm's face reddened. 1,000, 1,500. The words left Maverick's mouth before he could consider the consequences. That was everything: his dreams, his future, his hope of ever owning anything in this world. Going once, ... going twice, ... The auctioneer's gavel hung suspended like a sword. 2,000. Grimm's voice dripped with malice. He knew he'd won. No drifter carried that kind of money. Maverick closed his eyes, his hand finding the silver pocket watch his dying father had pressed into his palm. The last thing of value he owned. A $2,500 and this watch. He held up the timepiece, its surface gleaming in the afternoon sun. "It's worth at least 500 more." The crowd fell silent. Even Grimm's mouth hung open. Solace's chains clinked as she leaned forward, her amber eyes filling with something that looked dangerously close to hope. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried to his ears like a prayer. "Why?" Maverick met her gaze steadily. "Because I've been looking for you my whole life, and I didn't even know it until right now." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. "Sold to the gentleman in the worn coat." The auctioneer's declaration rang across the market square as Maverick's legs nearly buckled beneath him. $3,000. Every cent he'd ever earned, plus his father's watch, the only thing connecting him to family, to home, to who he'd been before the road claimed him. Grimm approached like a circling vulture, his pale eyes calculating. "Interesting investment, stranger. That girl's got fire in her. Burned down her last master's kitchen trying to escape." His thin lips curved into something resembling a smile. "Of course, fire can be tamed with the right methods." "She won't need taming," Maverick said quietly, counting bills from his worn saddlebags with steady hands despite the earthquake in his chest. "She'll need healing." As the transaction completed, a deputy unlocked Solace's shackles. She rubbed her wrists, where the metal had chafed her skin raw, never taking her eyes off Maverick. When the chains finally fell away, she didn't run. Instead, she walked down the platform steps with the dignity of a queen descending a throne. "You're either the stupidest man in Tennessee," she said when she reached him, "or the craziest." "Which is it?" "Both, probably." Maverick shouldered his nearly empty saddlebags. "But I've been dreaming about you since I was 15 years old. Same amber eyes, same stubborn chin, same way you stand like you're ready to fight the whole world." Solace studied his face with an intensity that made him feel transparent. "I've dreamed of you too," she admitted finally. "A man with storm-gray eyes and calloused hands who smelled like leather and open sky. I thought you were just hope playing tricks on my mind. They walked through the dispersing crowd toward his horse, a steady bay mare named Poetry. The afternoon sun cast long shadows between the wooden buildings of the small village, and somewhere a church bell tolled the hour. "Where will you take me?" Solace asked as Maverick helped her up behind his saddle. "Wherever you want to go. You're free now." Free. She tested the word like it was foreign on her tongue. "I was born into chains, sold at 16 when my first master died, sold again at 20 when the next one lost his fortune gambling. I don't know what free looks like." Maverick swung up into the saddle in front of her, and we'll figure it out together. As Poetry carried them out of town, Solace's arms encircled his waist tentatively, as if she expected him to push her away. Instead, Maverick covered her hands with one of his own. "There's a cabin about 10 miles north," he said. "Abandoned since the war? We could rest there tonight. Make plans." "Plans," Solace repeated. "I've never been allowed to make plans." "Well," Maverick said, as the village faded behind them and the road stretched ahead into wilderness, "you've got the rest of your life to practice." Behind him, he felt her smile against his shoulder blade. And for the first time in 3 years of wandering, Maverick felt like he was finally traveling toward home instead of away from it. The abandoned cabin sat in a clearing where wildflowers grew thick as carpet between towering oaks. Maverick had discovered it 2 months ago during a thunderstorm, sheltering there when lightning split the sky like God's own anger. Now, in the golden light of evening, it looked less like refuge and more like possibility. "Previous owner left in a hurry," Maverick said, dismounting and helping Solace down. His hands lingered at her waist longer than necessary, and neither of them pulled away. "War got bad around here. Most folks fled north." Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by shelves still holding mason jars and dried herbs. A simple wooden table sat beneath the single window, and in the corner stood a bed frame that had seen better decades. Solace ran her fingers along the table's surface, tracing old knife marks and water stains. "It feels peaceful," she said. Wonderingly, "I'd forgotten places could feel peaceful." Maverick built a fire while she explored, stealing glances at her whenever she turned away. In the growing firelight, she looked less like the broken woman on the auction block and more like the vision from his dreams, strong, beautiful, untouchable as starlight. "Tell me about the dreams," she said suddenly, settling cross-legged on the floor near the fire. The flames painted amber shadows across her face. "When did they start?" "Summer. I turned 15. Maverick joined her on the rough wooden floor, maintaining careful distance. "Was working a cattle drive through Kansas when fever took half the crew. Spent 3 days delirious, burning up under the prairie sun." He stared into the fire, remembering. "When the fever broke, I started seeing you. Every night for 8 years. What did you see?" "You, reading by candlelight. You, hanging laundry on a line behind a white house. You, standing in a garden with dirt under your fingernails and wildflowers in your hair." He looked at her directly. "You, free and happy and loved." Solace drew, her knees to her chest. "My dreams were different. I saw a man with kind eyes who would come riding out of nowhere to save me. Childish fantasy," I told myself. "Desperate hope from a desperate girl." She laughed bitterly. "Except you're real. You came, not soon enough." "Soon enough?" "Har!" Her voice carried a finality that made him look up sharply. "I would have died in Grimm's hands. There's something broken in that man, something that feeds on suffering." The fire crackled between them, filling the silence with orange light and wood smoke. Outside, night sounds began, all calls and rustling leaves, the distant howl of something wild and lonesome. "What happens now?" Solace asked quietly. Maverick reached into his saddlebag and withdrew the deed to 40 acres of Missouri farmland, his original destination before fate detoured him to a Tennessee slave market. "I was headed north to claim this land. Build a house, plant crops, maybe raise cattle." He held out the folded paper. "We could go together, as partners." Partners? Her amber eyes searched his face. However you want it to be. I'm not expecting. I don't assume. Ran a hand through his dark hair, frustrated with his. Clumsy words. You've been owned by other people your whole life. I won't own you too. Solis took the deed and unfolded it carefully, studying the legal language in the firelight. 40 acres, she murmured. Room for a garden, maybe a few chickens. More than enough room for anything you want to grow. She refolded the paper and held it out to him. Then let's go build a life, Maverick. When he didn't take the deed back, she tilted her head questioningly. Keep it, he said. Your name should be on it too. Dawn came soft and pink through the cabin's single window, finding Solis already awake and watching Maverick sleep by the dying fire.
Aye.
In the gentle morning light, the hard lines around his eyes had softened, making him look younger than his 23 years. She'd spent the dark hours memorizing his face, the scar above his left eyebrow, the stubble along his jaw, the way his hands stayed relaxed even in sleep. Freedom, she decided, felt like being able to look at someone without asking permission. Morning, Maverick said without opening his eyes, a smile tugging at his mouth. How did you know I was watching you? Same way I knew you were coming, probably. He sat up, running fingers through sleep-messed hair. Dreams don't lie about the important things. They shared hardtack and coffee from his supplies, sitting on the cabin's front step as mist rose from the surrounding meadow. Poetry grazed nearby, her reins loose and trailing. Tell me about Missouri, Solis said, cradling her tin cup between her palms. River country, rolling hills, good soil for corn and wheat. The land's on a creek that runs year-round, plenty of fish and fresh water. Maverick pointed north through the trees. 3 days' ride if we don't push too hard. You bought it sight unseen. Sometimes you have to trust that what you're meant to find will be there waiting. As they prepared to leave, Solis helped him saddle Poetry with practiced efficiency. Her hands were gentle with the horse, and the mare responded by nuzzling her shoulder affectionately. She likes you, Maverick observed. Animals can sense when someone's afraid. I'm not afraid anymore. Solis stroked Poetry's neck. First time in my life I'm not afraid. They rode north through Tennessee hills that rolled like green waves toward the horizon. Solis sat behind Maverick, no longer tentative about holding him as the miles passed. She asked him about the places he'd been, the things he'd seen in 3 years of drifting, and he found himself telling stories he'd never shared with anyone. She asked as they stopped to water Poetry. At a creek crossing, never found what I was looking for, which was, Maverick considered this seriously, watching sunlight dance on the creek's surface. Home, I suppose. But not just a place, something that made all the wandering make sense. That evening, they camped in a grove of cottonwoods, sharing rabbit Maverick had snared and wild greens Solis had gathered with knowledge that surprised him. My grandmother taught me about plants, she explained when he asked, for she was sold away, said a woman who could heal and feed people would never be completely powerless. They slept on opposite sides of their small campfire, but Maverick woke twice during the night to find Solis watching him across the flames. The second time, she spoke into the darkness. I'm scared this is another dream, and I'll wake up back. On that auction block? It's real, he said quietly. We're real. How can you be sure? Because dreams are perfect. They don't include mosquito bites and sore backs from sleeping on rocks. He shifted to find a more comfortable position against his saddle. This is better than perfect. This is true. In the morning, they crossed into Missouri territory, and Solis laughed for the first time since he'd known her, a sound like water over stones. Bright and clear and utterly free, the land spread before them like a promise written in green ink across rolling hills. 40 acres of Missouri earth, bisected by a clear running creek and bordered by oak trees that had weathered a century of seasons. Maverick felt Solis's arms tighten around his waist as they crested the final hill, and her sharp intake of breath told him she saw what he saw home. It's beautiful, she whispered. The property came with a half-finished cabin. It's abandoned when the previous owner headed west for California gold. Stone foundation, 4 walls reaching chest-high, Timber cut and seasoned, but never raised. Enough. Work to last them through summer, but solid enough to complete before winter. We'll need to build the roof before the first frost, Maverick said, dismounting and helping Solace down. Think we can manage it? I've never built anything in my life, she admitted, walking to the stone foundation and running her hands over the carefully fitted rocks, but I learned quick. They spent 3 days exploring every inch of their land, mapping the creek's path, identifying the best spots for gardens and pasture. Solace discovered wild strawberries growing in sunny patches and showed Maverick where previous owners had planted apple trees now heavy with young fruit. Look, she said on the 4th morning, kneeling beside the creek, wild mint and watercress. We won't starve, even if the crops fail. Maverick watched her gather greens, her movements sure and economical despite her lack of formal education. She'd learned to survive in ways that humbled him. His wandering years had been chosen, hers had been forced. Yet here she was, planning their future with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted tomorrow would come. They began construction on the 5th day, working in companionable silence punctuated by her questions and his patient explanations. Solace proved surprisingly strong, able to lift and carry timber that would have strained many men. When Maverick commented on this, she shrugged. Fieldwork builds muscle. Housework builds endurance. Being owned builds both. You're not owned. Any more, he reminded her, holding a beam steady while she secured it with wooden pegs. I know, but those years made me who I am. Can't pretend they didn't happen. By evening, they had raised 2 walls. They sat by their campfire, sharing beans and cornbread, watching fireflies dance above the creek. Maverick, Solace said suddenly, why did you really come to that market? Don't say it was chance. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, I was in the next county over, heard talk about a big slave auction. Something pulled me there. Call it instinct, call it God, call it whatever you want. But when I saw you, he shook his head. I knew I'd been searching for you. Without knowing it, my whole life. Even though you'd never seen me before, I had seen you every night for 8 years. Solace stared into the fire, processing this. The dreams weren't just dreams, were they? They were... what? Prophecy? Destiny? Does it matter what we call it? She looked at him across the flames, this man who'd given up everything for a stranger he'd seen in sleep. No, she said finally. What matters is what we do now. And what do we do now? Solace stood and walked around the fire to sit beside him on the fallen log they'd been using as a bench. For the first time since he'd bought her freedom, she initiated contact, taking his work-roughened hand in both of hers. We build something that lasts, she said simply, and make those dreams real. August settled over Missouri like a warm quilt, bringing days of steady work and nights filled with cricket. Songs. The cabin rose wall by wall, beam by beam, shaped by 4 hands that learned to work in perfect synchrony. Maverick would start a task, and Solace would anticipate his next knee tools. Nails, another pair of hands to hold something steady. She absorbed construction knowledge like fertile ground absorbing rain. You're a natural builder, he told her one afternoon, as they fitted the final roof beam into place. I'm a natural survivor, she corrected, wiping sweat from her forehead. Building's just another kind of surviving. But Maverick saw something beyond survival in the way she touched each completed wall, the pride that lit her amber eyes when she stepped back to admire their progress. This wasn't just shelter to hurt, was proof that she could create, instead of merely endure. Their evening routine had evolved into something that felt remarkably like marriage without any formal vows. Solace would gather vegetables from the wild garden she'd started behind the cabin while Maverick tended poetry and checked his fish traps. They'd cook together, eat together, sit by the fire, planning the next day's work. When conversation lulled, the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. We need to talk about winter, Maverick said one evening, as September cooled the air. Food stores, firewood supplies we'll need from town. Solace tested the word carefully. Will people ask questions about us? Probably. Married couples don't typically look like they've never seen each other before. He glanced at her sideways. You could make it official if you want. Find a preacher. get proper papers. Is that what you want? The question hung between them like morning mist. Maverick set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. Want whatever makes you feel safe and free, he said carefully. If that's marriage, then yes. If it's staying as we are, then that's fine too. Solace studied his face in the firelight, seeing the honesty there, the careful way he never pushed. Never assumed, never demanded. What did you want before you met me? What was your plan? Build the cabin, work the land, maybe find a wife someday who could stand my cooking and didn't mind that I talked to horses? You don't talk to horses? I do. Poetry and I have very meaningful conversations about the weather and the quality of grass. Despite herself, Solace laughed. What does poetry think about me? She thinks I'm an idiot for sleeping on the other side of the campfire when there's a perfectly good woman who obviously cares about me right there. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Solace went very still. Obviously cares about you, she repeated quietly. Maverick felt his cheeks heat. I just meant you meant correctly. Solace moved closer on the log where they sat, close enough that he could smell the mint soap she'd made from creek herbs. I do care about you. Maverick, more than I thought possible after everything. Celeste, I want to marry you, she said simply. Not because I need protection or security, but because somewhere between the auction block and tonight, I fell in love with a man who gave up his dreams so I could have mine. Maverick reached up to touch her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. I didn't give up my dreams. I found out they were smaller than I thought. Turns out everything I really wanted was you. When he kissed her, it was gentle and questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she kissed him back with the fierce tenderness of someone who'd never been allowed to choose before. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the darkness, poetry nickered approvingly. The preacher arrived on a crisp October morning, riding a swayback mule and carrying a worn Bible in his saddlebags. Reverend Hoskins was circuit minister for 3 counties, performing marriages, baptisms, and funerals wherever folks needed the Lord's blessing on life's most important moments. Mighty fine cabin you've built, he said, accepting coffee and corn cakes from Solace. Been through here last spring wasn't nothing but a foundation then. We work well together, Maverick said, watching his soon-to-be wife serve their guest with natural grace. The ceremony took place beside the creek. With October maples blazing gold and crimson overhead, Solace wore her only dress, the simple blue cotton Maverick had bought her in the last town, but with wildflowers in her hair and happiness lighting her amber eyes. She looked more beautiful than any bride in silk and pearls. Do you, Maverick Durham, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice carried across the water, strong and sure. Do you, Solace, ... The preacher paused, realizing he'd never been given her surname. Freeman, she said quietly. Choosing her own last name in that moment, Solace Freeman. Maverick's eyes filled with understanding and pride. Freeman, of course. Freeman, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband.
I do.
The words rang like church bells across their 40 acres. The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife as the creek sang behind them and poetry whinnied from the pasture. When Maverick kissed his bride, it tasted like creek water and wildflower. Honey, like freedom and forever and coming home. Now then, Reverend Hoskins said, producing official papers from his bag, let's make this legal and proper. That evening, after the preacher had ridden away with his blessing and their thanks, Maverick and Solace sat on their cabin's new front porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Or his mother's ring now the only thing of value left after he'd spent his fortune buying her freedom. Any regrets? She asked, lacing her fingers through his. Only that I didn't find you sooner. We found each other when we needed to. Any earlier, and maybe we wouldn't have been ready. Maverick considered this. Maybe you're right. 8 years ago, I was just a boy with dreams. Now I'm a man with a wife and land and a future worth building. What do you think we'll dream about now? Solace wondered, now that all our dreams came true. New dreams, I suppose? Children, maybe? Grandchildren running around this creek, climbing those oak trees? A good life, Solace agreed. an ordinary, extraordinary, gloriously free life. As winter settled over Missouri, they discovered that marriage was both harder and easier than either had imagined. Harder because sharing space required patience and compromise. Easier because they'd both learned to value what they'd found too much to let small. Disagreements threatened it. Spring brought their first planted crops and news that Solace was carrying their child. Summer brought abundant harvests and the sound of a baby's cry echoing off cabin walls. Their son had Maverick's storm-gray eyes and Solace's stubborn chin, and when he smiled, it was pure sunlight. "What shall we name him?" Maverick asked, holding his son while Solace rested. "River," she said without hesitation. "For the water that brought us together and the current that carries us forward." Years passed. River grew tall and strong, joined by a sister they named Dawn, and then a brother called Forest. The cabin expanded, room by room, as their family grew. Neighbors settled nearby, drawn by good land and the Durham's reputation for kindness and fair dealing. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Maverick and Solace would sit by the creek and remember the day he'd seen her face across an auction crowd and known his wandering days were over. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to that market?" Solace would ask. "Never," Maverick would answer. "Because there was never a world where I wouldn't have found you. The dreams made sure of that." In the darkness, the creek would sing their love song to the stars, carrying it downstream to other hearts, other dreamers, other souls meant to find each other across impossible odds and discover that some things are worth everything you have to give.